Hello and welcome. I am Tamara and today we are going to be sewing two different sunglass cases. The first one is going to be this pouch here, and then after that we will sew this sunglass case here. Now, for both of these cases, I do want to mention that the best sewing tool that you can have for this project is a sewing stiletto. Let me show you what a sewing stiletto looks like. This here, can you see it? This here is a sewing stiletto. It has a very pointy end. I will link to a few in the description down below. The best part about a sewing stiletto is it allows you to push your thick fabric down towards those feed dogs to get your project started. Because when you are sewing through thick layers of fabric, sometimes your sewing machine can start struggling on these ends. I'm gonna put this down now before I stab myself in the eye. Okay, much better. So as you can see here on this case, you're going to end up starting on points and stopping on points. Now, stopping doesn't really matter, but the starting point matters because your sewing machine can get a little bit stuck on those ends. So a sewing stiletto will allow you to keep your fingers safe and get that sewing machine going at the very beginning and very ends of your projects. Another thing that I want to mention about these cases is that I have created them so that they can actually hold a pretty thick pair of sunglasses. So as you can see here, this pouch, this pair of sunglasses, maybe you can't see, can you see now? This pair of sunglasses is quite thick and it fits in this pouch easily enough. And of course, if you do want to make this project for just a pair of reading glasses can be quite narrow depending on your pair. So my reading glasses have a lot of extra space in here. So if you are making this project for reading glasses in mind, this project in particular, when you cut the fabric, is 7.5 inches wide. So what I recommend for a narrower pair of reading glasses is you actually cut the fabric 6.5 inches wide instead of that 7.5 inches wide. Keep the length measurements all the same. And then you'll just have a bit more of a narrower case if you want to do that for reading glasses. And one more thing before we jump on into these sunglass case sewing tutorials, say that 5 times fast, is that I have a printable version as well that you can check out, and this is linked in the description down below. I get a lot of comments on my tutorials asking for printable versions, so I am going to start making more of those for you guys, and you will always find those linked in the description down below. So let's jump on in and start getting sewing. So for this first sunglasses case, you will need 2 pieces of cotton cut 7.5 inches tall by 7.5 inches wide. You will also need some fusible fleece, and this fusible fleece will also be cut at 7.5 inches tall by 7.5 inches wide. Now, once all 3 pieces have been cut to the correct size, it will be time to take the outer fabric that you want shown on the outside of your sunglasses case, and you will fuse that to your fusible fleece. So lay the bumpy side of your fusible fleece, the bumpy side is the side where the glue is, to the back side of that cotton fabric. Now do this following your fusible fleece instructions. All right, now that that is fused in place, lay your outer fabric with your inner fabric, and you're going to lay that right sides together. Now, if you do have a fabric that has a directional print, make sure you're paying attention to where the direction is during this next step, because you are going to fold your project in half and then take a round object like a mug or a small bowl and just lay it on the bottom corner and then trace that curve alongside that bottom corner. Then, following that curve, just snip away the excess fabric before opening it up and laying it flat once again. Then pin around the entire outer edge. Now you do have one straight edge that will be the top of your sunglasses case, and you want to make sure that you do not sew about a 4-inch opening along that top edge. That way you'll be able to reach on in and turn it right side out later on. So once it's clipped, take it to your sewing machine and sew a 1/4-inch seam allowance around this entire project, leaving that flat edge with a 4-inch opening. And of course, do this starting and stopping with a back stitch. All right, so your 1/4-inch seam allowance has been sewn. You have your 4-inch opening on that straight edge, but before you turn your project right side out, snip away the excess fabric. That's those 2 top corners. And then along your 2 curves, just make small little snips, of course, making sure not to snip across your seam allowance. But by doing these small little snips, you are allowing that fabric to stretch once it's turned right side out. So now you can reach on in, turn your project right side out, and you can press that edge out using your finger. And then using something like a chopstick or a turning tool, reach that on in to rub it along the entire edge and push out those 2 top corners very gently. That way you don't pop out those corners. And then take it to your iron and give this entire thing a nice press. That 4-inch opening, you'll want to fold those flaps in, line it up nice and straight, and then press across that edge as well, and then clip it in place. Use a top stitch of about 3 millimeters in length and sew an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance along that straight edge. That will close that 4-inch opening. Then sew a 1/4-inch seam allowance along that top edge as well, just giving it a nice finished look. Do this starting and stopping with a back stitch. Now, once you've done those 2 seams, you can fold your project in half. So the fabric that you want on the outside will be facing on the outside, and the fabric that you want as your lining will be facing inwards. Now, this is an optional step, but as you are clipping this in place, you can slip on in a little loop. Now for myself, I like to use twill tape for this. You could also use ribbon. Just cut a 2-inch piece, fold it in half, and then tuck it on in to that edge and clip it in place. Then take it back to your sewing machine, and this time you are going to start by sewing a top stitch, that 3 millimeter length, along that entire outer edge except a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance first. Once you've sewn that 1/4-inch seam allowance, then if you want to, especially if you have added that little loop, you will sew an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance along that outer edge after that. I find starting with the 1/4-inch seam allowance allows you to seal everything in the way that you want, and then that 1/8 of an inch seam allowance is a lot easier to sew if that 1/4-inch seam allowance is already there. Now that you have officially learned how to make that simple sunglass case pouch, I highly recommend that you try your skills at making this snap pouch here. Now, I do have the printable pattern, and you will need the printable pattern for this project because there is a cutout pattern in here that you will need for this project. So check out that link in the description down below. And now let's jump on in and get sewing. So the first thing you'll do is cut out piece A and piece B from the pattern. Then grab some tape and line up the top edge of piece B with the dotted line on piece A, and then you can tape it together. Then I recommend folding the line that is in piece B in half up towards that edge that you just taped, and then trim along both of those sides. This allows you to make sure that your side pieces will all line up later on. Now, the fun thing about this project is that you can take a piece of fabric and you can have a look at your pattern piece and see where you want the fabric to end up. So remember that the section where I've written piece A on is the flap. So you will be seeing that the most out of anything else. So make sure that wherever you are lining that up on your fabric, you are lining it up in a way that you're going to end up with a nice print displayed in that section. So I'm going to lay it right here and trim it away that way. My big flower will end up on the back, but that curved little set of buds is going to end up on my flap, which I think is going to look really pretty in the end. Now, if you're using a smaller print, you probably don't need to consider this fact at all, and you'll probably save on fabric if you do that as well, because then you can just lay your pattern piece onto your fabric and cut away without any of this concern. As you can see here, I have pinned my pattern in place, and then I'm just going to use a rotary cutter to cut around my pattern. You can use scissors if you prefer. Do this for both the outer fabric as well as for the fabric that you've chosen for your lining fabric. And then you will also need to cut out a piece out of some fusible fleece. Now, earlier I told you to fold your pattern piece in a way that you could line up your edges, and I highly recommend that you do the same thing with your fabric. So stack both the lining and the outer fabric together, fold it in half, and then you can trim along those edges if you find that they don't line up perfectly. Now it is time to fuse that fusible fleece to your outer fabric. So lay the wrong side down onto the bumpy side of that fusible fleece. The bumpy side is the glue side, and then press it in place. Of course, if you are concerned that you're going to get some glue on the bottom of your iron, then just lay another piece of fabric on top of that and follow your fusible fleece directions to fuse it correctly. Next, you can take both the outer and the lining fabric and lay them right sides together, and then pin around the entire project. So it's at this point that you need to add your loop in. So cut yourself a 2-inch section of ribbon or twill tape, fold it in half, and then tuck it on inside your project, following those guidelines on the pattern piece. So lay the pattern piece on top of your project. If your fusible fleece is facing upright, like it is in my tutorial, and you add the loop in, your loop is going to end up on the right side of your project when you're looking at it. If you want your loop on the left side, then you'll have to just follow the guidelines, but turn your pattern piece over. That way your loop can be on the left side. I hope that makes sense. Once your loop is tucked into place and pinned, then it's time to take this to your sewing machine. You will sew a 1/4 inch seam allowance around your entire project, leaving that bottom straight edge open. So you want about a 4-inch opening to be able to turn this project right side out. So a 1/4 inch seam allowance around the entire project, starting and stopping with a back stitch. And this is what it will look like once those seams are sewn. But before you turn your project right side out, you do need to trim away some excess bulk from all 4 corners on your project. As you can see here, I'm making sure not to cut into that seam allowance. Then grab a pair of snips or smaller scissors, and you need to create some stretch on your project. So where your curve goes inwards, and of course your larger round curve, just snip a few little snips in there. That way your fabric can stretch when turned right side out. Now, if you do have a pair of pinking shears, you can take those pinking shears and just trim around that larger round edge, and that will do the same thing as just snipping along that entire round edge. Then it's time to turn your project right side out. Gently push out those edges with your finger and then reach on in with something like a chopstick or a pen with a lid on it, a turning tool of some kind, and just run it along all of those edges, gently pushing out those bottom corners as well, before taking it to your iron and pressing the entire project neat and flat. And then, of course, that 4-inch opening that we left earlier, just fold the flap inwards and press and clip that in place as well. Then take this to your sewing machine and sew a 3mm length top stitch across that top edge, around 1/8 of an inch seam allowance, and that will close up that 4-inch opening. Then sew a second seam at a 1/4 inch seam allowance along that same edge, as it will just give it a much nicer look. Then it will be time to fold that bottom flap up towards the curve and clip along both of those side edges. Then you will take this back to your sewing machine and you will sew a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance, still using that 3mm top stitch. You'll start on one edge, you'll sew all the way up to that curve, you'll sew all the way around the curve, and then back down, sealing up that other edge. Do this starting and stopping with a back stitch. And now it is time for us to add our snaps. So a snap kit like this often will come with a lot of different colorful plastic snaps. I highly recommend that you get yourself a kit like this. It doesn't cost too much and it is so useful and easy to install. So I will link to a few in the description down below, but all you really have to do is figure out what color snap you would like. And then you can either follow the little dotted guide that I have on the pattern piece, line it up along that top curved edge, and then you can use the awl that comes with your snap set to push through the dot on the pattern piece and create a hole on your flap. And once you have created your hole on the flap, then fold it over, grab yourself a pen, and just through that little hole, you can draw a little dot, and the dot you can put another hole through, of course, making sure not to push that all through the back of your fabric. So just through that front flap, but not the back flap. Now you've got yourself 2 holes that you can add your snaps on through. I do have a whole tutorial that walks you through how to use this snap tool in depth, as well as looking at other snap tools if you're interested. So I will link to that in the description down below as well. But once you have installed your snaps, you are done and you have created a beautiful sunglasses case. And as you can see here, I am tucking a pretty thick pair of sunglasses into the case and it fits great. And what I love about the snap placement is you actually snap it below where the sunglasses sit, so you're never putting pressure on the sunglasses themselves. And that, my friends, is how you can sew some very nice sunglass cases. I hope that you enjoyed this tutorial, and if you did, please hit that thumbs up button because that lets YouTube know that this was a good video, and so then it will recommend it to others that may appreciate it as well. And of course, hit that subscribe button so that you don't lose me here on YouTube, as that is easy to do. I hope that you guys have a wonderful summer using your sunglass cases, and I will see you next time. Bye for now.